Jake Torres wiped the grease off his hands with an old rag as he made his way through the dimly lit corridors of the Imperial hangar. The human mechanic had been fixing ships for the Valerian Empire for about 6 months now, and he took pride in doing his job right. Most alien mechanics would run a quick scan and call it a day, but not Jake. He believed in checking everything twice, maybe even 3 times if something felt off. That's exactly what brought him to the restricted section that afternoon. His handheld scanner had picked up a weird energy reading coming from behind one of the sealed walls. The signature didn't match anything in the fleet database, and that bothered him. In his experience, mystery readings usually meant trouble down the line. Better to find it now than during an emergency. The access panel took some work to open. Years of neglect had fused the mechanisms, but Jake had dealt with worse. When the heavy door finally slid open with a groan of protest, a wave of stale air rushed out. He coughed and waved his hand in front of his face, then stepped inside. The chamber beyond took his breath away. It was enormous, easily 3 stories tall and wide enough to park a dozen shuttles. Dust covered everything in thick blankets, and the air had that particular stillness that comes from a place nobody has entered in a very long time. Warning symbols decorated the walls, floor, and ceiling in repeating patterns. Jake couldn't read ancient Valerian script, but he recognized warning markers when he saw them. At the center of it all sat the machine. Jake stopped walking and just stared. In 20 years of working with alien technology, he had never seen anything like this. The thing was massive, roughly the size of a small apartment building, with a hull that seemed to be made from some kind of dark metal. Geometric patterns covered its surface, intricate designs that seemed to shimmer and shift whenever Jake looked away and then back again. His mechanic's instincts kicked in immediately. This was old technology, really old, but there was something elegant about its design. Despite the layer of dust and obvious signs of neglect, the underlying craftsmanship was incredible. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. Jake approached slowly, his boots leaving tracks in the undisturbed dust. The closer he got, the more details he could see. Some of the panels were corroded, their surfaces pitted and worn. Energy conduits that should have been glowing sat dark and dead. This machine hadn't run in ages, and it showed. His fingers itched to start diagnostics to figure out what it was and how it worked. He walked around the base looking for access points or control panels. There had to be some way to interface with it, some maintenance port or diagnostic terminal. That's when he found it, a section of the hull that looked different from the rest. The surface was smoother, with indentations that might have been controls. Jake pulled out a small flashlight and examined the panel more closely. The symbols here were different, more refined than the warning signs outside. They almost looked like instructions. He ran his hand along the surface, feeling for anything that might indicate functionality. The metal was cold under his palm, but as his fingers traced the patterns, he noticed something. There was warmth there, just barely perceptible, like the hull was retaining some tiny amount of residual energy. His curiosity piqued. Maybe this thing wasn't as dead as it looked. That's when he heard the sound of running footsteps echoing through the corridor outside. Multiple sets moving fast. Before Jake could turn around, Emperor Rathek himself burst through the entrance, flanked by 4 royal guards in full armor. The Emperor's face, normally a dignified blue, had turned pale purple with fear. "Don't touch that!" Rathek screamed, his voice so loud that the translation device on Jake's collar crackled with static. But it was too late. Jake's hand was already pressed flat against what he now realized was definitely a control panel. He felt the surface respond instantly. The cold metal suddenly became warm, then hot. Energy surged underneath his palm, and Jake tried to jerk his hand away but found he couldn't. Something was holding him there, not physically but through some kind of magnetic or energy field. The machine hummed to life. The sound started low, almost below hearing, then built rapidly into a deep thrumming that Jake could feel in his bones. The dust on the hull began to vibrate and fall away in sheets. The geometric patterns across the surface blazed with light, brilliant blue energy racing along channels that Jake hadn't even noticed before. Within seconds, the entire chamber was lit up like it was midday. Emperor Rathek's legs gave out. 2 guards caught him before he hit the floor, but the Emperor wasn't looking at them. His 4 eyes were locked on the machine, wide with absolute terror. "No, no, no," he kept muttering. "Not again. Please, ancestors, not again." Jake felt something wrap around his forearm. He looked down and saw tendrils of pure light extending from the control panel, coiling around his arm like living things. They didn't hurt, but they were definitely doing something. He could feel the machine scanning him, reading him somehow. It was like standing in front of an X-ray machine, but instead of looking at his bones, this thing was looking at everything about him. "What the hell is this?" Jake shouted over the increasing hum of the machine. The Emperor managed to find his voice, though it shook badly. "The Titan," he said, and the translator made his words sound hollow with dread. "You have awakened the Titan." "Okay, and what's a Titan?" Jake asked, still trying unsuccessfully to pull his hand free. Radheck stared at him like he just asked what oxygen was. "The weapon that destroyed the previous galactic civilization. The machine that ended an empire spanning 10,000 worlds. It has been sealed in this chamber for 50,000 years because every species that tried to claim its power was annihilated." The Emperor's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And you just woke it up." Jake felt his stomach drop. The light around his arm intensified, and suddenly there was something else there, something vast pressing against his mind. It felt like standing at the base of a mountain and having that mountain lean down to examine him. The presence was ancient, powerful, and very much awake. The Titan had begun its evaluation. Jake Torres, mechanic from Earth, was being judged by a weapon older than human civilization itself, and he had absolutely no idea whether he was about to live or die. Jake's arm felt like it was on fire, but not in a painful way. The tendrils of light had crawled up past his elbow now, wrapping around his bicep and shoulder. Each one pulsed with energy as it touched his skin, and he could feel the Titan digging deeper into his mind. It wasn't reading his thoughts exactly, more like it was examining who he was at a fundamental level. Emperor Radheck was still on the floor, propped up by his guards. The alien ruler's face had gone from purple to almost white. "Do not resist it," he called out, his voice strained. "The precursors designed it to bond with a single operator. If you fight the process, it will interpret that as hostility. And if it decides you're hostile—" "Let me guess," Jake said through gritted teeth. "It kills me and probably everyone else on this planet?" "This system," Radheck corrected. "It would sterilize this entire star system in approximately 4 minutes." Jake forced himself to take a deep breath and relax his muscles. Fighting wasn't going to help anyway since he couldn't move his arm. The presence in his mind grew stronger, like a spotlight had turned directly into his thoughts. He could feel it sorting through his memories, his feelings, his intentions. The sensation was deeply uncomfortable, like having a stranger rummage through your bedroom drawers. Then something unexpected happened. The Titan paused. Jake felt its attention shift, almost like it had found something confusing. The pressure against his mind changed from invasive to something more like curiosity. An image flashed through Jake's head, not his own memory but something the Titan was showing him. He saw a massive alien creature, covered in crystalline armor, screaming commands at the machine. The alien's thoughts were clear even across 50,000 years. "Obey me, serve me, give me your power." The image shifted. Now Jake saw a different species, these ones tall and thin with too many joints in their limbs. They weren't commanding the Titan, they were worshipping it, chanting and bowing before it like it was a god. Their thoughts pressed against the machine. "You are divine, you are perfect, you are beyond us." More images followed, faster now. Species after species, all approaching the Titan the same way. Some wanted to control it, to use it as a weapon against their enemies. Others feared it so much they treated it like an angry god that needed to be appeased. But none of them, not a single one, had ever just tried to understand it. Jake felt the Titan's attention focus on him again, and this time there was something almost like a question in it. "What are you?" it seemed to ask. "You're not trying to command me. You're not worshipping me. What do you want?" Without really thinking about it, Jake answered out loud. "I just wanted to figure out what you are and how you work." His voice echoed in the massive chamber. "You're an incredible piece of engineering. Look at these power distribution systems, the way your hull is designed. Whoever built you knew what they were doing. I was just curious about your design, your purpose." The Emperor made a choking sound. "You're talking to it like it's a person. Isn't it?" Jake asked. The tendrils of light around his arm had stopped spreading. They just held him now, pulsing gently. "I mean, it's clearly intelligent. It's making decisions, evaluating me. That's not just programming, that's consciousness." More images flooded into Jake's mind, but these were different. He saw the precursors, the species that had built the Titan. They were surprisingly humanoid, though taller and with skin that seemed to shimmer with bioluminescence. He watched them constructing the Titan, not as a weapon of conquest but as a guardian. Its purpose was to protect their civilization from something that came from outside normal space, entities that existed in dimensions where the laws of physics worked differently. The Titan had been proud of its purpose. It had been part of something greater, a defender of life and civilization. But then Jake saw the precursors turn on each other. Political factions formed, philosophical differences became violent conflicts. The civilization that had created such marvels tore itself apart from the inside. The external threat they feared never came, but they destroyed themselves anyway. Jake felt the Titan's grief as if it were his own. The machine had sealed itself away, ashamed that it couldn't save its creators from themselves. It had vowed to remain dormant until a species worthy of its purpose came along. A species that understood cooperation over domination, partnership over ownership. Is that why you've been judging everyone who tried to wake you? Jake asked softly. You weren't looking for someone strong enough to command you. You were looking for someone who would treat you as an equal? The pressure against Jake's mind suddenly released and he gasped. The tendrils of light unwound from his arm and retreated back into the hull. But Jake could still feel the Titan's presence, now more like a warm glow at the back of his thoughts instead of a crushing weight. It had made its decision. Emperor Rathek struggled to his feet, staring at Jake with all four eyes wide. You're still alive, he said, sounding shocked. In 50,000 years, you're the first to survive the bonding process. I don't think it was trying to kill anyone, Jake said, flexing his arm experimentally. Everything seemed to work normally, though he could feel a faint tingle where the light had touched him. It was testing them. All those species that died, they failed the test because they saw it as a weapon to be controlled or a god to be feared. Neither of those was what it wanted. And what does it want? One of the guards asked nervously. Jake turned back to look at the Titan. Its hull was fully illuminated now, patterns of light flowing across its surface like water. He could feel its consciousness alongside his own, not controlling him but present, aware, waiting. It wants what it was built for, he said. To be a guardian. To protect. But it wants to do that as a partner, not as a slave or a master. The Emperor took a cautious step closer. Can you control it? No, Jake said, and he saw Rathek's face go pale again. But I don't think control is the point. It's bonded with me, yeah, but that's not the same as taking orders. It's more like we can communicate now, understand each other. It'll listen to me because it chooses to, not because it has to. That's insane, the Emperor said flatly. It's the most powerful weapon in galactic history and you're saying we can't control it? Jake shook his head. You're still thinking about it wrong. It's not a weapon. I mean, yeah, it can fight, that's part of what it was designed for. But calling it a weapon is like calling a surgeon's scalpel a knife. Technically true, but you're missing the whole point of what it's actually for. He placed his hand back on the hull, and this time the metal was warm and welcoming under his palm. The Titan responded immediately, and Jake felt a surge of something that could only be described as contentment. After 50,000 years alone, grieving and waiting, it had finally found someone who understood. So what happens now? Rathek asked. Before Jake could answer, every alarm in the palace began blaring at once. A young Valerian officer ran into the chamber, clutching a data pad, his face twisted with panic. Your Majesty, he gasped. Long-range sensors have detected something at the galactic rim. Massive energy signatures, dozens of them. They're tearing holes in space itself. The Emperor grabbed the data pad and his face went from white to gray. No, he whispered. It can't be. Jake felt the Titan stir in his mind, and suddenly he knew what was happening. The external threat the precursors had feared, the enemy the Titan was built to fight, had finally arrived. 50,000 years late, but here nonetheless. The Void Singers had returned and they were hungry. The next 3 days were chaos. Half the Imperial Court wanted to evacuate the planet immediately. The other half wanted to find a way to destroy both Jake and the Titan before whatever was coming at the galactic rim arrived. Emperor Rathek spent most of his time in emergency council meetings, trying to keep his government from tearing itself apart. Jake, meanwhile, stayed in the hangar with the Titan. He'd asked for his tools, some food, and to be left alone. The guards posted outside the chamber doors thought he was crazy, but they weren't about to argue with the human who'd somehow survived bonding with an ancient superweapon. On the morning of the second day, Jake sat cross-legged on the floor beside the Titan with a sandwich in one hand and a datapad in the other. He'd been studying the geometric patterns on the hull, trying to understand their purpose. The Titan's presence hummed quietly in the back of his mind, watching him work with what felt like patient amusement. Okay, so these aren't just decorations, Jake said out loud. He'd found that talking helped him organize his thoughts, and the Titan seemed to appreciate being included in the conversation. These patterns are part of your power distribution network, right? Like circuit boards but way more advanced. A warm pulse of acknowledgement flowed through their connection. Jake grinned. They were getting better at communicating. At first, everything the Titan shared had been overwhelming, like trying to drink from a fire hose. But now Jake was learning to interpret the feelings and impressions it sent his way. Show me how it works, Jake said. The patterns on the hull shifted, and suddenly Jake could see the energy flowing through them. It was like the Titan had made its systems transparent just for him. He watched in fascination as power moved through the network in complex spirals and loops, each pathway serving multiple functions simultaneously. It was the most elegant piece of engineering he'd ever witnessed. Beautiful, he murmured. Then something occurred to him. Hey, you're not running at full capacity, are you? Some of these pathways are dark. A feeling of confirmation came through, tinged with something that felt like embarrassment. The Titan showed him an image of itself 50,000 years ago, every system fully powered and operational. Then it showed him now, with large sections dormant or damaged from millennia of disuse. Jake stood up and walked closer, examining one of the dark sections. You need maintenance. Regular upkeep. Man, 50,000 years without anyone checking your systems. It's a miracle you're running at all. He paused, then added, unless you were maintaining yourself somehow? Another affirmative pulse, this one weaker. The Titan had been doing what it could, but there were limits to what it could repair without external help. Some systems required physical intervention, components that needed to be replaced or rebuilt. It had been slowly degrading for millennia, preserving only the most essential functions. Well, that ends now, Jake said firmly. You've got a mechanic again. A real one. We're going to get you back to full operational status. The feeling that came through their bond was so strong it almost knocked Jake over. Gratitude, relief, and something that felt almost like joy flooded his mind. He realized with a start that the Titan was happy. Actually, genuinely happy for the first time in thousands of years. Over the next several hours, Jake worked his way around the Titan's exterior, cataloging damage and making notes. The machine helped by highlighting problem areas and explaining what each system was supposed to do. It was the strangest collaboration Jake had ever experienced, working on a piece of technology that could tell you exactly what was wrong with it. That evening, Emperor Radhek finally came to visit. He looked exhausted, his robes rumpled and his face drawn. 2 guards followed him into the chamber, though they stayed well back from the Titan. The council wants to know what you're doing, Radhek said without preamble. Jake didn't look up from the power coupling he was examining. Maintenance. Your people have been neglecting this machine for 50,000 years. Half its secondary systems are offline, and the primary weapons array is running at maybe 60% capacity. Can you fix it? The Emperor asked. Given enough time and the right materials, yeah, probably. Jake made a note on his datapad. But that's not really the important question, is it? Radhek moved closer, his earlier fear apparently overcome by curiosity and desperation. Then what is the important question? Whether the Titan will fight for you when those things arrive. Jake finally looked up, meeting the Emperor's eyes. Because I'm not going to force it to do anything. That's not how this works. The Emperor's face tightened. The Void Singers will be here within a week, maybe less. They'll consume everything in their path. We need that machine. It's not a machine, Jake corrected. I mean, technically yes, it's constructed from technology. But it's a person, Radhek. It thinks, it feels, it makes decisions. And it has every right to choose whether or not it wants to help you. That's insane, Radhek said, echoing his words from 2 days ago. It was built as a weapon. Jake set down his tools and stood, facing the Emperor directly. It was built as a guardian. There's a difference. Weapons are passive things, tools that anyone can pick up and use. Guardians make choices about what to protect and why. The precursors understood that, even if nobody since then has. He gestured toward the Titan's hull, where light pulsed in slow, steady rhythms. Every species that tried to wake this thing up approached it the same way. They saw power and wanted to own it. They never stopped to think about what the Titan wanted or why it was created in the first place. And what does it want? Radhek asked quietly. Jake felt a surge of communication from the Titan and he smiled. To be useful. To have purpose. It was built to defend life, and it's been sitting here for 50,000 years unable to do that. The isolation and inactivity have been torture for it. The Emperor absorbed this information slowly. Will it defend us against the Void Singers? I don't know, Jake admitted. I haven't asked yet. I've been focused on getting to know it first, understanding how it thinks. You can't just ask someone to risk their life without building trust first. Radhek looked at him like he'd grown a second head. You're worried about building trust with a weapon that could obliterate planets? Yes, Jake said simply. Because that's exactly why it chose me. I'm not trying to command it or worship it. I'm trying to understand it. And that's what it's been waiting for all this time. He turned back to the Titan and placed both hands on its hull. The connection between them deepened immediately, and Jake felt the machine's full attention focus on him. He didn't send words exactly, more like concepts and feelings. The approaching threat. The people who would die if nothing stopped it. The choice the Titan had to make. The Titan responded with its own wave of communication. It showed Jake memories of the precursors, the civilization it had loved and lost. Then it showed him images of the current galaxy, billions of lives going about their daily existence, unaware of the danger approaching. Finally, it showed Jake its core programming, the fundamental purpose written into every system. Protect life, defend the innocent, stand against the darkness. Jake understood. The Titan would fight because that was what it was built to do. Not because anyone commanded it, but because it chose to fulfill its purpose. The only question was whether it could trust the species asking for help to treat it as more than just a weapon afterward. "I'll make sure they understand," Jake said softly. "You're not going back into storage after this. You're not going to be hidden away and feared. If we survive this, you'll have a place here as an equal, not as a tool." The Titan's response was wordless but clear. It would fight for the galaxy one more time. But it would do so as Jake's partner, not as anyone's slave. They would face the Void Singers together, combining the ancient machine's power with human adaptability and intuition. Emperor Radhek watched this exchange in silence. When Jake turned back to him, the Emperor's expression had changed. There was still fear there, but also something that might have been respect. "The fleet is mobilizing," Radhek said. "They're gathering at the rim to meet the threat. When can you be ready?" Jake looked up at the massive machine towering above them. "Give me 2 more days to finish critical repairs. Then we'll go introduce your enemies to something they haven't seen in 50,000 years." The Emperor nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the entrance. "Jake Torres," he said, "if this works, if you and that thing somehow stop the Void Singers, the galaxy will owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Jake just smiled. "I'm not doing it for payment. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Besides," he patted the Titan's hull affectionately, "someone's got to look out for this big guy. Might as well be me." The Void Singers arrived ahead of schedule. Jake was still elbow-deep in one of the Titan's secondary power systems when the emergency sirens started blaring throughout the palace. He dropped his tools and ran to the nearest communication terminal, the Titan's presence stirring urgently in his mind. The view screen showed footage from the outer rim, and Jake felt his stomach drop. Space itself was tearing open like wet paper. Through the massive rifts, things were emerging that hurt to look at. They didn't reflect light properly, and their shapes seemed to shift and change depending on the angle you viewed them from. Some looked almost like massive jellyfish made of shadow and starlight. Others resembled geometric impossibilities, forms that shouldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. "What am I looking at?" Jake asked, though he already knew from the Titan's memories. Emperor Radhek's voice came through the comm system, tight with barely controlled panic. "The Void Singers. They're manifesting in 3 systems simultaneously. The outer defense fleets are engaging now." Jake watched as Valerian warships opened fire. Energy beams and missiles streaked toward the entities, and for a moment, Jake thought they might actually hurt them. Then the weapons simply passed through the Void Singers like they weren't even there. The entities didn't dodge or shield themselves. The attacks just failed to connect with them in any meaningful way. One of the Void Singers reached out with something that might have been a limb. It touched a battleship, and the entire vessel simply came apart. Not exploded, not destroyed in the traditional sense. It unraveled at a molecular level, its matter converting into streams of exotic particles that the Void Singer absorbed like food. "They're in our space but not entirely in our dimension," Jake muttered, understanding flooding through him from the Titan. "That's why conventional weapons don't work. They exist partially in a place where matter and energy follow different rules." Another transmission came through, this one from Admiral Vrentz, commander of the Valerian Defense Fleet. "We can't touch them. Repeat, conventional weapons are completely ineffective. They've already consumed the 3rd and 7th fleets. We need options now or we're evacuating the Rim worlds." Radhek's response was immediate. "Hold position. Reinforcements are coming." The Emperor's face appeared on Jake's screen a moment later. "Please tell me you're ready." Jake looked around at his tools scattered across the floor, at the open access panels on the Titan's hull, at the diagnostic readouts showing systems still in need of repair. They'd made incredible progress in 2 days, but the Titan was still operating well below optimal capacity. "We're not at 100%, he admitted. "More like 75. Maybe 80 on a good day." "Is it enough?" Jake felt the Titan respond before he could answer. Confidence flowed through their bond, mixed with something that felt like eagerness. The ancient machine had been built specifically to fight entities like the Void Singers. Even damaged and degraded, it knew its capabilities. Yeah, Jake said, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. It's enough. We can do this. Then get to the rim. Now. 20 minutes later, Jake was inside the Titan for the first time. The interior was nothing like he'd expected. Instead of corridors and control rooms, he found himself in what could only be described as an interface chamber. The walls were smooth and featureless until he touched them, then they lit up with displays and controls that responded to his thoughts as much as his hands. A seat emerged from the floor in the center of the chamber, and Jake sat down without being told. The moment he did, his connection with the Titan deepened dramatically. He could feel every system, every power flow, every sensor array as if they were extensions of his own body. It was overwhelming and exhilarating at the same time. Okay, he said out loud, gripping the armrests. Let's see what you can do. The Titan lifted off smoothly, its ancient engines humming to life with barely a vibration. Jake felt the palace hangar fall away beneath them as they rose into the sky. Valerian fighters scrambled to escort them, but the Titan left them behind in seconds. It accelerated toward orbit with the kind of casual power that made Jake's heart race. The journey to the rim took less than an hour at the speeds the Titan could achieve. Jake spent the time studying the tactical displays, watching the Void Singers spread through the outer systems like a plague. Dozens of the entities had emerged now, each one consuming everything in its path. Planets, stations, ships, it didn't matter. Anything made of normal matter was food to them. The precursors called them Void Singers because of the sound they make, Jake said, reading information from the Titan's databanks. They emit some kind of frequency that exists partially outside normal spacetime. Humans can't hear it, but most species can. It drives them insane. He pulled up more data, trying to understand what they were about to face. The Void Singers came from a dimension the precursors had called the Deep Dark, a place where the fundamental laws of physics worked differently. They fed on matter from regular space, converting it into the exotic particles they needed to survive. Left unchecked, they would consume the entire galaxy. The Titan shared its own memories of fighting these things 50,000 years ago. The battles had been brutal and costly. Even with the precursors' advanced technology, they'd barely managed to drive the Void Singers back. And that was when the Titan had been at full power, supported by an entire fleet of similar guardians. We're going in alone this time, Jake said. Just you and me. A pulse of determination came through their bond. The Titan wasn't afraid. It had been built for this exact purpose, and it was finally getting the chance to fulfill it again. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the combat zone. The scene before them was carnage. Wreckage from destroyed ships floated in clouds around the massive tears in space. The Void Singers moved through the debris like sharks through water, absorbing everything they touched. The remaining Valerian ships were falling back, trying to maintain a safe distance while having no way to actually fight. Admiral Vrent's voice crackled over the comm. Unknown vessel, identify yourself. This is Jake Torres in the Titan, Jake replied. We're here to help. There was a long pause. The Titan? The sealed weapon? You actually got it operational? More than operational, Admiral. We're ready to engage. Jake felt the Titan's weapon systems powering up, energy building in conduits that hadn't been used in 50 millennia. I need you to pull your fleet back to minimum safe distance. What we're about to do might get messy. What's minimum safe distance? Jake checked the Titan's tactical displays and winced. About 3 light minutes. These things operate partially outside normal space, and our weapons need to create dimensional disruption fields to hit them. The side effects are going to be intense. He could practically hear the Admiral's shock through the comm. 3 light minutes? That's halfway back to the inner system. Trust me on this. Get your people clear. The fleet began withdrawing, and Jake turned the Titan's attention to the nearest Void Singer. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon, its form constantly shifting between different geometric configurations. Through their bond, Jake felt the Titan analyzing it, calculating attack vectors and power requirements. You're sure about this? Jake asked quietly. The response was immediate and absolute. This was what the Titan had been created for. Every system, every weapon, every line of code in its programming had been designed with this exact enemy in mind. 50,000 years ago, it had helped save a galaxy. Today it would do so again. All right then, Jake said, settling deeper into the interface seat. His hands moved across controls that appeared wherever he needed them, his thoughts synchronizing perfectly with the Titan's targeting systems. Let's show these things why the precursors built you. The Titan's main weapon array came online, and space itself began to warp around them. Energy gathered in ways that made Jake's instruments scream warnings, power levels climbing toward values that should have been impossible. The Void Singers seemed to sense the threat. Several of them turned their attention toward the Titan, moving with sudden, unnatural speed. Jake smiled grimly. "Too late," he said and fired. The blast that erupted from the Titan didn't look like any weapon Jake had ever seen. It was more like a tear in reality itself, a beam of pure dimensional disruption that crossed the distance to the nearest Void Singer in an instant. When it hit, the entity's form destabilized. For the first time since they'd arrived, one of the Void Singers actually reacted to being attacked. It writhed and twisted, its exotic matter breaking down under the assault. Then it simply ceased to exist, unraveling back into whatever dimension it had come from. The remaining Void Singers suddenly focused entirely on the Titan. They came at it from all directions, abandoning their feast to eliminate this new threat. Jake felt a spike of adrenaline as dozens of the entities converged on their position. "Okay," he said, his hands flying across the controls. "Now it gets interesting." "Retry." The Void Singers swarmed toward them like angry hornets, and Jake felt his pulse hammering in his ears. Through the Titan's sensors, he could see them clearly now, each one a nightmare of impossible geometry and shifting shadows. There were at least 40 of them, maybe more emerging from the tears in space with every passing second. The Titan fired again, and another Void Singer dissolved under the dimensional disruption beam. But the others kept coming, spreading out to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Jake's hands moved across the controls, and the Titan responded instantly, spinning and dodging with an agility that seemed impossible for something so massive. "They're fast," Jake muttered, watching 3 Void Singers converge on their position from different vectors. Way faster than the precursor records indicated. A feeling of agreement pulsed through their bond, tinged with concern. The Titan shared a realization with him: these entities had evolved over 50,000 years. They'd adapted, become more efficient predators. The tactics that worked against them in the ancient past might not be enough now. One of the Void Singers got close enough to reach out with a tendril of darkness. Jake felt the Titan's hull shudder as the entity's limb passed through their shields like they weren't there. Alarms blared as the touched section began to destabilize, matter starting to convert into exotic particles. "Hull breach, Section 7, Jake called out, his mechanics instincts kicking in immediately. He pulled up the damage control systems and began routing power away from the affected area. "Seal it off. We can't let them feed on you." The Titan responded by ejecting the entire compromised section, explosive bolts firing to separate the damaged hull plates before the conversion could spread. The discarded metal drifted away, still dissolving into streams of strange energy that the Void Singer absorbed hungrily. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. That had been close. Too close. He fired at the Void Singer that had touched them, and it retreated, but 3 more moved in to take its place. "This isn't working. We take down 1 or 2, but there are too many of them. They're going to wear us down." Through their connection, Jake felt the Titan analyzing the situation. It ran combat simulations at speeds no human mind could match, calculating odds and outcomes. The conclusion wasn't good. At their current rate of engagement, they'd destroy maybe a dozen Void Singers before the Titan's power reserves ran dry or the accumulated damage became too severe. And there were at least 50 entities now, with more arriving every minute. They needed a different approach. Raw firepower wasn't going to be enough. Jake pulled up the tactical display and studied it carefully, watching the Void Singers' movements. They seemed chaotic at first, but as he focused he started to notice patterns. "Wait," he said slowly. "They're not just attacking randomly. Look at how they're moving." The Titan highlighted the entity's trajectories on the display, and suddenly Jake could see it clearly. The Void Singers were taking turns, rotating in and out of attack positions in a coordinated rhythm. When one pulled back to absorb matter and regenerate, another would move forward to press the attack. It was like watching a dance, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "They have a cycle," Jake said, excitement building in his voice. "A pattern. Every 17 seconds, there's a gap in their formation when they rotate positions. It's only a fraction of a second, but it's there." He felt the Titan's attention sharpen, focusing on what he'd noticed. The ancient machine ran the calculations and confirmed it. Jake was right. The Void Singer's coordination created a vulnerability, a brief moment when their formation was weakest. "But we can't exploit just one gap," Jake continued, thinking out loud. "We need to use it to get to the real problem." He zoomed the display out, looking at the massive tears in space where the Void Singers were emerging. "Those rifts, that's where they're coming from. We could spend all day fighting the ones that are here, but more just keep showing up. We need to close the rifts. The Titan shared its knowledge of how the Void Singers created their entry points. They worked together, multiple entities combining their dimensional manipulation abilities to tear through the barrier between spaces. As long as the rifts stayed open, more Void Singers could pour through. But closing rifts required getting close to them, and they were always guarded by the strongest entities. So we need to get through their formation, reach one of those tears, and collapse it before they stop us. Jake leaned back in the interface seat, his mind racing. That's suicide. Even if we make it through, we'd be surrounded with no way out. A wave of calm determination flowed through their bond. The Titan wasn't afraid. It had faced impossible odds before. And more importantly, it wasn't facing them alone this time. It had Jake, and Jake had something none of the precursors had possessed. A mechanic's intuition for finding creative solutions to impossible problems. Jake smiled despite the danger. All right, partner. You trust me? The response was immediate and absolute. Yes. Then here's what we're going to do. Jake's hands flew across the controls, bringing up power distribution systems and weapon configurations. I noticed something about your weapons. They create dimensional disruption, right? They force the Void Singers back into normal space so they can be hurt. Another affirmative pulse. What if we overload that effect? Not to destroy one entity but to create a massive disruption field. It would take almost all our power and we'd be vulnerable afterward, but if we time it with their rotation gap. The Titan caught on immediately, running simulations of what Jake was proposing. It would work barely. They could create a disruption pulse strong enough to destabilize every Void Singer within range, forcing them all fully into normal space for a few crucial seconds. In that window they'd be vulnerable to conventional weapons. The Valerian fleet could actually hurt them. More importantly, the pulse would give Jake and the Titan a clear path to the nearest rift. It's crazy, Jake admitted. We'll be running on backup power by the time we reach the tear. If we can't close it fast enough, we're done. But there wasn't a better option. They both knew it. The Void Singers were adapting their tactics even now, tightening their formation, learning from their engagement with the Titan. Soon there wouldn't be any gaps to exploit at all. Jake opened a channel to Admiral Vrentz. Admiral, I need your fleet ready to fire on my signal. Every ship, every weapon, all at once. I'm going to give you a 10-second window where these things can actually be hurt. Don't waste it. What are you planning? Vrentz asked. Something stupid, Jake replied with a grim smile. But it's our only shot. Get your ships in position. We're going in 30 seconds. He closed the channel and focused entirely on his connection with the Titan. Their minds synchronized more deeply than ever before, human intuition blending with ancient processing power. Jake could feel the Titan's energy building, power being drawn from every non-essential system and channeled into the dimensional disruptor. Through the sensors, he watched the Void Singers swarm around them, their movements following that 17-second rhythm. Jake counted down in his head, timing it perfectly. 15 seconds. 10 seconds. 5. Now! Jake shouted, and the Titan released everything. The pulse exploded outward in a sphere of raw dimensional energy. Space itself rippled like water, waves of disruption washing over every Void Singer within a light second. The entities shrieked, though not with sound that Jake could hear. He felt it through the Titan's sensors, a frequency that existed partially outside normal reality, the song that gave them their name. For exactly 10 seconds, the Void Singers were forced entirely into normal space. Their forms solidified, became vulnerable. And the Valerian fleet, ready and waiting, opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams, missiles, kinetic rounds, every weapon in the fleet's arsenal converged on the exposed entities. And this time the attacks connected. Void Singers exploded, their exotic matter unable to withstand conventional firepower when they couldn't phase out of normal space. In those 10 seconds the fleet destroyed 20 entities. But Jake wasn't watching. He'd already gunned the Titan's engines, accelerating toward the nearest rift at maximum speed. They shot through the gap in the Void Singer formation, racing toward the massive tear in space that pulsed with sickly light. The disruption pulse faded, and the surviving Void Singers recovered. They turned as one toward the Titan, realizing too late what Jake was attempting. They came after him, but he timed it perfectly. The Titan reached the rift 3 seconds before the nearest entity could intercept. Up close, the tear was even more horrifying. Jake could see through it into the dimension beyond, a place where geometry made no sense and colors existed that human eyes weren't meant to perceive. More Void Singers were gathered on the other side, waiting to cross over. How do we close it? Jake asked urgently. The Titan showed him. The rift was held open by a specific frequency of dimensional energy, a harmonic resonance created by the Void Singers. To collapse it, they needed to generate the exact opposite frequency, a counter-resonance that would destabilize the tear and seal it shut. It would take everything they had left. Every last drop of power in the Titans' reserves. They'd be dead in space afterward, completely defenseless. Jake didn't hesitate. Do it. The Titans' remaining energy channeled into a focused beam, not of destruction this time but of pure harmonic opposition. The beam hit the rift and Jake watched the tear begin to shrink. Slowly at first, then faster as the counter-resonance took hold. The Void Singers realized what was happening and went into a frenzy. Dozens of them converged on the Titan, their tendrils reaching out to tear it apart. Jake felt impacts shuddering through the hull, sections of armor dissolving under their touch. Alarms screamed as system after system went offline. But the Titan didn't stop. It held the beam steady as the rift collapsed, preventing any more Void Singers from crossing over. The entities on the other side pressed against the shrinking opening, desperate to get through before it closed completely. The tear shrank to the size of a pinpoint, then vanished completely. The dimensional barrier sealed itself, and suddenly the number of Void Singers stopped increasing. The ones already in normal space were trapped here, cut off from reinforcements in their home dimension. The Titan's beam cut off as the last of its power drained away. Every light on the control panels went dark. The engines died. Life support switched to emergency backups. Through their bond, Jake felt the ancient machine falling into dormancy, its reserves completely exhausted. "Good work, partner," Jake whispered. "We did it." The Void Singers surrounded them now, and Jake knew they only had seconds before the entities tore the Titan apart. But then the Valerian fleet arrived, ships interposing themselves between the disabled Titan and the enemies. Without the rift producing reinforcements, the remaining Void Singers were manageable. The fleet engaged them while a massive cargo hauler moved in to secure the Titan's hull with tractor beams. Admiral Vrent's voice came through on emergency power. "We've got you, Taurus. Just hang on." Jake sagged in the interface seat, utterly exhausted. Through the viewport, he watched the fleet systematically destroy the remaining Void Singers. It took another hour, but eventually the last entity was eliminated. The immediate threat was over. 3 days later, Jake stood in the palace throne room while Emperor Radhek addressed the assembled court. The Titan had been towed back to the capital and was currently resting in a custom-built hangar, slowly recharging its systems. "Jake Taurus," the Emperor said formally, "you and the Titan have saved not just our empire but potentially the entire galaxy. Name your reward, and if it's within my power to grant, it shall be yours." Jake had thought about this. He knew what he wanted. "The Titan needs a home," he said. "Not a sealed chamber or a weapons locker. A real home where it can rest between missions, where it's treated as a member of your community, not as a tool." Radhek nodded slowly. "It shall have a place of honor in the palace grounds. And I'd like to keep my job," Jake added. "Maintaining your fleet. Someone needs to keep those ships running properly. Plus, the Titan's going to need regular maintenance now. It can't go another 50,000 years without a mechanic." The Emperor smiled, something Jake had rarely seen. "You wish to stay? After all this, you want to remain a mechanic?" "Best job I ever had," Jake said honestly. "Besides, somebody's got to look after my partner." Through their bond, still present even across the distance to the hangar, Jake felt the Titan's contentment. After 50,000 years of isolation, grief, and waiting, it had finally found what it was built for. Not to be a weapon or a god, but to be a guardian with purpose and a friend who understood. The galaxy was safe at least for now. And in a custom hangar at the heart of the Valerian Empire, an ancient machine rested peacefully, knowing it would never be alone again.